Could we see a significant trade involving the Montreal Canadiens, and could it involve longtime goalie Carey Price? We'll discuss why that would make sense for them and how they could benefit from it coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today I want to discuss the possibility of the Montreal Canadiens doing a significant deal that could send longtime and one of the greatest goalies in franchise history, Carey Price, out of the team. Of course, we know that Carey Price is injured. Carey Price is, at this point, pretty well confirmed not to ever play hockey again. But he is still under contract for a couple of more years. So you might be asking yourself, well, first of all, why would they trade a player who's not going to play again? And why would they even think of that? How could they benefit, or how could another team benefit? Well, that's why we're going to talk about this. Because it could be interesting, and it could have a good effect on the Habs and whatever team they deal with. So, for context purposes, Carey Price still has 2 years left on his contract, and he's scheduled as a cap hit at $10.5 million. Now, he's also got some big signing bonus money built into that contract. And now players that have done these long-term deals with big money and big bonuses, they usually have a lot of bonuses in the back end of the deal so that they can make it buyout proof, which is essentially kind of what happened. So between the final 2 years of the contract, Carey Price is owed $11 million in signing bonuses over those 2 years. Now, of course, July 1st is the beginning of the fiscal year. That's when all new contracts start again. And then for the new season, goes from July 1st to June 30th. Of course, the season runs, October to June or May or whatever. But players are only paid during the regular season, of course, during that time frame. But at the same time, we're not far off from the next season on the calendar getting started. So, obviously, $10.5 million on the cap, $11 million in signing bonus money alone in those 2 years. It's a lot of money. Now, why would the Montreal Canadiens want to trade the Carey Price contract? Now, of course, we saw them trade the Shea Weber contract. And I guess to boil down and summarize it as simple as possible, so everybody kind of understands here, is that essentially, being in long-term injury reserve is not really all that great. You have to be very creative in how you maximize it, how you capture it, how you utilize it, and while you're in it, you don't accrue cap space. The cap is calculated on a daily basis, and when teams can accrue space throughout the season, so when they want to make trade deadline acquisitions, that's why you see somebody and they may only have, you might be looking at them saying, well, they've only got $2 million in space. How can they add a $4 or $5 million player? Because they've been accruing cap space for the entire year, and it's all prorated based on the amount of time left in the season. So it's complicated math. It's not exactly just as simple as, oh, we have $2 million here, we're going to add boom, boom, boom. Like, it's not that simple. It's a complex thing, which is why websites like capfriendly.com and puckpedia.com and all these guys, of course, CapFriendly is going to be going away soon, because they were purchased by the Washington Capitals and taking away one of our favorite toys here, so not happy about that. But, obviously that's why those sites exist, to help kind of simplify all these things. So essentially, to get into the long-term injury reserve, you need to, you're only going to do that when you max out your salary cap. So obviously coming up for the next year, $88 million is your ceiling for the salary cap. So the Habs would have to have a full $88 million team on their cap before they can then, inject the LTIR and spend above it up to a maximum of $10.5 additional dollars because of his contract. So for a team that hasn't been in the playoffs in a few years, maybe they don't really want to be a cap team, or at least not completely maxed out. Yes, the Habs are one of the wealthier franchises in the league. They can certainly do it. Doesn't mean ownership, especially, is going to be overly thrilled about it. But at the same time, like I said, because of how the cap is calculated, you have to be very creative with how you capture the long-term injury reserve to maximize it the most. And at the end of the year, if you've been in a long-term injury reserve all season, well, if you want to retain money on a contract, or you want to pick up a contract and to acquire extra draft picks or kind of weaponize your space, you can't really do that because you're not accruing cap space throughout the year. So you see some of these teams that have been non-playoff teams that have available space, they've been weaponizing it and saying, okay, well, this team over here is going to the playoffs. They need to move some money because they want to get another player. I'll take that off your hands for the rest of the season, but I want you to give me a sweetener for it, give me a draft pick. Well, it's harder for them to do stuff like that. They don't have as much flexibility. It's just a little bit more complicated when you're in long-term injury reserve. So clearly, like when they moved Shea Weber, it was the same thing. They're reducing the amount that can be in LTIR. So just because they have a huge amount of LTIR availability doesn't mean they want to and need to spend that type of money. So the other thing here, too, is you can save actual cash. Like I said, he's owed a lot of money, including $11 million in signing bonuses over the final 2 campaigns of his career. Now, of course, part of that's going to be due on July 1st. So for a team that's going to pick him up, they may look at that and say, well, let's say they're talking to Montreal now, which is still a few weeks away from July 1. After July 1 rolls around on July 2nd, when that bonus is paid, that $11 million drops in half to 5.5 because he's getting $5.5 million this year, $5.5 million next year. So, the Habs pay one of those bonuses, the other team takes and pays the rest. So that drastically reduces the amount of actual cash that the other team that would pick him up would have to pay him. So you might say, well, why would a team trade for a player making a ton of money who's not going to play? Okay, well, there's a couple of scenarios that might play out where that might benefit them. For one, and you used to see this a lot, and you may not see that this example this year, but like the Arizona Coyotes, for a long time, they were very much, you could say, a cap floor team. You see teams that are cap teams spending to the max. Well, they wanted to spend to the minimum. So what they would do is they wouldn't even need long-term injury reserve. So they always typically had, 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 long contracts on their books for players that were injured and not going to play. They didn't even need to go into long-term injury reserve. They just let it, because it has to count on your original cap first before you can spend above it. And then that just means that the rest of the roster is making that much less money. They'd have a lot of players on, $1 million, $2 million deals. They didn't have very many players that were actually on the ice making any kind of significant money. So it and some of those long-term injury contracts can be covered under insurance too. So it just really cuts down the amount of money out of their pockets. So even though they are meeting the cap regulations for being a floor, at least above the floor, in a lot of ways they weren't. So you could argue that it was like a loophole. It's not really a circumvention because it's technically within the rules, but it's a loophole to get around it, right? So that's one of the main reasons why a team might want to get Carey Price. Another one would be that maybe they're one of those teams that wants to be complicated here and navigate through a really complex long-term injury reserve scenario. Look at the Vegas Golden Knights and the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're 2 great examples who have managed this better than anybody else. Right now, they're in go for it, win the Stanley Cup mode. They don't care if they're acquiring, if they're accruing the cap space like some of these other teams, because they've obviously been able to navigate this right throughout the season. So clearly they can add, and with Vegas's case, it's a little bit different because they've had the Mark Stone scenario where he goes on long-term injury reserve. They add a bunch more players in using his money, then he comes back for the playoffs. Well, we saw Tampa do this a couple of years back with Nikita Kucherov having surgery right before the season started, and then done for the year, but came back in game 1 of the playoffs, wins the Stanley Cup. Things like that happen, right? So it can be beneficial. So some of these teams, like Vegas, we know they're always looking to add top money, top players to this team. They're not done. We've heard, for example, Mitch Marner was linked to the Vegas Golden Knights, right? So if the Leafs pull off a Marner trade, maybe that's where he ends up. Obviously, at this point, Tampa, they're trying to sign Steven Stamkos. It would be complicated for them to get a Carey Price contract. They'd have to move some money out, bring Price in, maximize the LTIR, and then spend above it. But they are the masters at figuring that out. So Vegas and Tampa would probably be the main teams that would be interested in acquiring a contract like this. I wouldn't completely rule out the Maple Leafs, another deep-pocketed team. They're contemplating moving Mitch Marner, not only from a cap perspective, but obviously there's the whole changing things up so that they actually have better results, right? They can't seem to win in the playoffs. So lots to talk about. Will they ask John Tavares to waive his no move and have him leave? Will they move Mitch Marner? Like those types of things. Well, we don't know what they're going to do yet, but we know that they're not afraid to spend money. There's been some times, especially during the Dubas years, that they've been well above the cap as well. They just haven't had the level of success in winning cups like Vegas and Tampa did. So at the same time, there could very well be some benefits there. Some of these teams are just, they don't care about spending money. They don't care about being the creative cap wise. They got this. They have their people that are whizzes at figuring this out. So could we see the Montreal Canadiens move the Price contract, get out of long-term injury reserve to be in a better overall cap situation? I think it's really a possibility, but it will be complicated because of how LTIR works and how everything works with other teams acquiring that kind of contract. They have to go into regular cap mode and then maximize it and spend above. Like, it's not the simplest thing to do. I would suggest if it did have a chance of happening, it would be a team like Vegas or Tampa. And if it doesn't happen now, maybe it'll be re-examined again next year for the final year. But there is some talk out there. There was an article on Montreal Hockey Now suggesting that the Habs should do this to be in a better overall cap situation. And it does make a lot of sense. So I'll link that article down below if you want to have a read through it. And certainly let me know your thoughts and the possibility of seeing this type of trade this offseason. Let me know your thoughts. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.